So good afternoon, everyone, and maybe good evening. I'm not sure where. Oh, well, of course, good evening to you, Melia. And I don't know if anyone's joining us from Asia, but if they are, good morning. And welcome to CAPI, the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives at the University of Victoria. I think most of you would know me, but if you don't, I'm Victor Ramraj. I'm the center's director. In case there are one or two of you who are joining a CAPI event for the first time, we're a dynamic interdisciplinary Asia-focused research center located in Victoria, BC, on Canada's west coast and on Coast Salish territory. So since I'm coming to you from the campus today, let me take a moment, and I know some of you are over in Clarihu. Let me take a moment to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanish peoples whose historical relationships to the land continue to this day. So I'm delighted to welcome you to another event organized by CAPI Senior Research Fellow, Global History Professor, Canada Research Chair, and all-round great colleague, Dr. Neilesh Bose. Neilesh has been organizing events, seminars for CAPI for years under the banner of the South Asia Global Forum and the Global South Colloquium. Now, most of you in the audience will be familiar with this series, Punjab and the World, History, Politics, and Migration. And today's talk is entitled Sikh Art and Activism in the Contemporary Era. It's the last talk in the series, I'm sorry to say, and it features UVic's very own Associate Professor Melia Belli Bose, who Neilesh will introduce in a few moments. But since this is the last talk, let me just say how absolutely delighted I've been with this series. I haven't been able to attend every single session, but the ones that I have been absolutely mind-expanding for me. I've learned so much from all of the presenters. It's been a marvelous, marvelous series. I think the students, I'm sure you know this, have been fortunate to have all of the amazing speakers from all over the world. I think this is really, I was talking to Neilesh about this not too long ago. I think this really is a model for what university education should be. And I'm really delighted that he's put it together. Melia, I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to leave a little bit early because we have a couple of double headers at CAPI today, and the next one I have to scurry off to in person. So I need to allow myself some time. So with my apologies, I will leave partway through the session, but I will be listening certainly to do the first part of it. So with all of that, thanks again, Neilesh, Dr. Bose, and let me hand the floor over to you to introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. And I think everybody in the group here has attended talks in the past, everybody who's logged in through Zoom. So I'll just say a few words of housekeeping and then continue onward to introduce our speaker. So in keeping with recent tradition, our speaker will speak for the first part of the program, approximately 30 to 35 minutes, followed by an open Q&A moderated by myself, and we aim to end at about 5 o'clock Pacific time. The chat is disabled, so I ask everyone who has questions or comments to please hold them until the end and to use the digital hand raise function. I will call on everybody in order. As a reminder, the program is being recorded, and I will ask everyone to ensure that their audio, oh my God, so sorry. Of course, just as I say that, audio is turned off.
Is that Neilesh?
With that, I will now introduce our speaker. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Professor Melia Belli Bose, an associate professor of art history here at the University of Victoria. Professor Melia Belli Bose is a specialist in South Asian art history, a specialist in women and gender in Asian art history, and in particular, the arts of death and commemoration. Her many publications include the book Royal Umbrellas of Stone, Memory, Politics, and Public Identity in Rajput Funerary Art, an edited book, which she edited and contributed to, titled Women, Gender, and Art in Asia, circa 1500 to 1900. And that book features essays on women's roles as makers, subjects, collectors, and commissioners of art across Asia. She's also edited the book Intersections, Art and Islamic Cosmopolitanism, and published numerous articles in leading art history journals on a whole range of topics, including recently articles on contemporary female artists in Bangladesh. She has taught art history in many colleges and universities across North America, from universities in Texas and in New York and here in Victoria and British Columbia. She has lectured to public audiences across the world, including audiences at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, amongst other venerated institutions. Her title today is Sikh Art and Activism in the Contemporary Era, and I turn the Zoom room over now to Professor Belli Bose.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Neilesh, and thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. It was a pleasure before I began to see so many familiar faces, or at least names, on the screen. And it is really an honor and a pleasure to be the last speaker in this truly fabulous series. So thank you. So I'd like to begin by just noting that, as Neilesh already said, I'm a historian of South Asian art, and my areas of research are really early modern and contemporary North Indian art, and more recently Bangladeshi contemporary art. And I say this as a segue into my disclaimer that although I am a longtime fan of the art of the Singh Twins, and few things give me greater pleasure than sharing it with others, I'm by no means an expert on their work. It's not my area of research. And I understand that you read and discussed Saloni Mathur's very thorough article. And I'd just like to put on your radar that another scholar, Kristen McKnight-Sadie, has a forthcoming essay on the Singh Twins. So I would like to begin by a little bit of background on the twins. The duo is comprised of identical twin sisters, Amrit Kaur Singh and Rabindra Kaur Singh, and they work together, as you read, on single works of art. Mostly they work on paintings. More recently, as McKnight-Sadie discusses, they work on digitally printed textiles, as well as other multimedia works. And as I'm going to discuss, their art is very much rooted in Indian miniature painting, as well as medieval European illuminated manuscripts, and also Western contemporary culture, specifically pop culture. They were born to Punjabi Sikh parents who immigrated from India to the UK. And the twins were born in London and grew up just outside of Liverpool. I think it's significant that they attended for grammar school an all-Catholic girls' school, where they were the only non-Catholics and the only students of South Asian descent. And I think this really informs their art and identity as well. They were originally set to go to medical school and become doctors, but their teachers identified this very prominent artistic talent early on and encouraged them to pursue this avenue. So in 1991, they studied art together at the University College in Chester, followed by Manchester University. Now, significantly, when they were in art college, and they discussed this at length, they, like other students. And I can tell you also, perhaps surprisingly, even students in much of South Asia, they were taught Western techniques. So for example, they learned how to create photorealistic shading and perspective. And in their requisite art history courses, they were taught exclusively Western art history. However, they frequented major museums in the UK, which have very robust South Asian collections. They grew up around South Asian visual culture, and growing up, they also visited India quite frequently. So as we'll see, the Singh twins are familiar with and appropriate from Indian miniature paintings. And for those of you who are not familiar with this genre, I know at least two of you are, the miniature paintings are typically book or album illustrations. And they are pretty small in scale, typically not more than about a foot in height. And they have a wealth of intricate and often narrative and or symbolic detail. And they're very much associated with the Mughal Empire and the contemporaneous Rajput royal courts that thrived from the 16th to the 18th centuries. Now, in college, the Singh twins attempted to incorporate aspects of Indian art into their paintings, but their teachers quickly shut that down. And they instructed them to paint, again, in this exclusively Western style. Their teachers criticized their paintings for being inappropriately rooted in an archaic Eastern or Oriental style. The idea, according to the teachers, was that these Eastern styles were old-fashioned and outdated. It was traditional and lacked creativity, or so the teachers were promoting. The Singh twins describe at length in a number of interviews how, while viewing, on the other hand, in their art history classes, while viewing Impressionist and post-Impressionist art, so think artists such as Manet, Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Matisse, these figures appropriated liberally from various non-Western artistic traditions. So the Singh twins thought to themselves, well, why couldn't they? So one of the Singh twins' initial creative, and I would definitely say activist goals as they developed their unique signature style, was to bring the rich heritage of Indian miniature painting to the attention of the wider global community. And this is their way of challenging what they perceived, and I think very rightly so, as this generally prevailing attitude, especially in art colleges, at least in the 90s, that West is best, this attitude. And so as teenagers, the Singh twins taught themselves the techniques and the content of Mughal miniature painting. And so they were painting from reproductions in books, as well as going and viewing works in UK museums. And as a personal note, as a teacher of art history, I really love teaching the Singh twins art because these two artists are so incredibly intelligent and they're so dedicated. They do thorough research, as we're really going to see. And I don't mean that just in terms of artistic style and technique, but in terms of history, visual history, as well as actual events. And you can see this in the very intricate details of their paintings. They're also incredibly eloquent and can talk at length about their stylistic and content choices in their paintings. Now, the twins describe their own unique style as a political expression. They refer to their style of painting as past modern, as opposed to postmodern. It's a kind of play on that genre. And what they mean by this is that their art is conspicuously rooted in the Indian miniature genre. So I'd like to read you a quote from them, and I think it really sheds light onto their artistic goals. Quote, "Our adherence to the miniature style became a political statement, a way of asserting the right to choose a visual language, true to our own interests in art and pride we felt for our Asian heritage, and challenging the hypocrisy of an establishment which advocated the Western values of self-expression and individuality as the be-all and end-all of modern art, yet denied the validity of anything which did not comply with the Eurocentric perspective," end quote. So that's what they were up against and continue to work against. So this, as you read in the Mathur article, the Singh Twins, what I would call brand, is not only their signature style, but also their public presentation of themselves. As you can see, they always dress alike, and they also even sign each other's names on their paintings. I would say that the Singh Twins today are really some of the most active and some of the most, among the most recognized and celebrated of living British artists. They've had numerous solo, if you can call it that in this case, exhibitions. And their other accolades include in 2009, the Queen conferred on them a very prestigious honor of being receiving what's known as an MBE, or the Most Exalted Order of the British Empire. And in 2011, they were both awarded honorary doctorates from the University of Chester. So I'm going to turn to the first painting that we'll spend some time on. And just to let you know, for this talk, I'm only focusing on two paintings. They're very rich, very detail heavy. And these two paintings really embody the Singh Twins' engagement that's both personal, it's political, and it's global, their own identity as being members of the Punjabi and the Sikh global diaspora. So the painting you're looking at is titled 1984, and the subtitle is The Storming of the so-called Golden Temple. And the painting, of course, depicts the very unfortunate incident that I'm sure you heard about in class of the attack on the Harmandir Sahib. And no doubt you covered this extensively in class, but to very briefly recap, in what was termed the Operation Blue Star, the Indian Army stormed the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which, as you know, is the most sacred Sikh site. And they did this in June 1984. This was the bloody climax to 2 years of fighting between the Indian Army and Sikh separatists. Indian Army troops fought their way into the compound and killed at least 500 Sikh rebels, more than 100 Indian soldiers, and scores of non-belligerent Sikhs who also perished in the gun and artillery fire. Now, I also think it's pertinent to note that, on the other hand, Sikh groups challenge these numbers and claim that maybe up to thousands died because a large number of pilgrims were at the site that day because it was one of the most important Sikh holidays in the calendar. So the twins painted this work 14 years after the event. They completed it in 1998. And it's clear that the wounds have turned to scars. They remarked of the painting that it reflects the personal sense of suffering and injustice that they, as well as other Sikhs worldwide, felt in the aftermath of the attack. The carnage is really conveyed here. Now, I hope you can all see my mouse here, but the carnage is conveyed most immediately by the blood seeping out from the central shrine. And I'd also like to note that the gold, so the actual Harmandir Sahib is a number of the architectural features, such as the dome, is covered in gold leaf. And taking a page out of Mughal miniature painting, the twins have applied actual gold to these architectural features. So we're going down for a closer look down to the lower left here. And in the lower left, and the most conspicuous feature is Indira Gandhi, who's driving a tank. And she's featured Ravana-like. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, Ravana is the villain of probably the most, the best known Hindu epic, the Ramayana. And Ravana, his iconography is these multiple heads. Now notice though, some of you will recognize these figures, rather than real demon heads, the Singh twins have given Indira Gandhi also the head of Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, and I can hear some people laughing in the background, and Margaret Thatcher. They haven't, as far as I know, they haven't specified why, but I think that it's probably because they really represent unbridled globalization, especially at that time. So as many of you know, Indian and international media generally portrayed Gandhi as the moral victor who liberated the Golden Temple from alleged Sikh terrorists. However, the painting strongly suggests that the main casualties of the attack were in fact these throngs of pilgrims who were ordinary people who were just caught in this confusion here. So there's this sense of horror and panic as notice all of these people that are just caught in the fracas and the melee as they're trying to find refuge from the bullets. And in fact, these figures down here, this very poignant scene of probably like a grandfather and then a man who's trying to shield his wife and very young children from the attacks. Now, it's important to note that, of course, Indira Gandhi wasn't physically at the site for the attack. However, she did green light the attack. And it seems that the twins included her in the painting to squarely put the bloodshed on her shoulders. And the Singh twins also reference a number of other important Sikh martyrs in this painting. So for example, we have Bhagat Singh, who he's right here with his very distinctive hat, and also Guru Tej Bahadur, who is the 9th Sikh Guru. Now, Guru Tej Bahadur was in fact actually decapitated. So this rendition of him is a little more true to his actual, what I would call hagiography. He earned the title after protecting India. His martyrdom earned him the title Protector of India. Now, as you can see there, Bhagat Singh and Guru Tej Bahadur, their heads are offered to Gandhi on what looks like a ceremonial silver platter. But notice the way that she just completely disregards them. She kind of flicks them away. And so this further kind of signifies that Gandhi and India are utterly dismissive of the sacrifices that Sikhs have made over the centuries for India. I want to draw your attention to this other figure here, this older man who is holding one hand, in one hand his severed head, and in the other he's wielding a sword. This is the iconography of Baba Deep Singh. And just to give you a more clear rendition of him and his iconography, this is a pilgrimage poster that would be available at a number of Sikh shrines. And Baba Deep Singh was in the 17th, 18th century. He defended the Sikh community, and he avenged Afghan hordes that had destroyed and desecrated the Golden Temple. And he's fabled to, after being killed by Afghan soldiers, to have carried his head in one hand, with the other hand to wield his sword and kill a number of Afghans. So that is his quite remarkable martyrdom and hagiography. But I've included the dates of these three martyred figures to really show you this long history that the Singh twins are highlighting here of Sikh protection of India and their long history of sacrifice to the community as well as to India that the Singh twins are highlighting here. Oops. So those of you who were alive in 1984 and cognizant and watching the news will recall that perhaps that national and international media coverage was really biased against Sikhs. And this was very damaging to their international reputation. And those of you who have taken this course know how that really snowballed to the detriment of the community. Now, the Singh twins reference that, the kind of muzzle on the media up here by these figures that are blindfolded. And here we've got a photographer. Notice how they are standing shoulder to shoulder with snipers from the Indian Army, showing that they're kind of in cahoots with the Indian Army doing their PR bidding, as it were. So, quick stylistic reading of this painting. I want you to really notice these strong diagonals that the painting is comprised of. And we also see a great overall flattening of the painting. We also see these multiple twisted, unnatural, as it were, viewpoints of the complex. And that really gives this idea of the chaos. It kind of, especially with the arcades here of the complex, it shows them, especially the innocent pilgrims, being hemmed in. Now, as far as I know, the Singh twins haven't spoken about this, but this really reminds me of another kind of similar incident in Punjabi history. And that, of course, is the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. And this idea of being trapped at a site and being attacked by the dominant power's army. And incidentally, the Jallianwala Bagh site is just a few minutes walk from the Golden Temple site. So this, excuse me, this flatness of the painting and these multiple twisted angles is also stylistically, historically rooted. One sees it in a number of early modern Indian paintings. And the twins also discuss how, on one hand, this creation of the distant bird's eye view of the Golden Temple itself, especially the central shrine, it symbolizes the geographical and physical separation that the diasporic community felt from what was happening as this was unfolding in 1984 in India. And that was, of course, compounded by the insufficient media coverage. However, in contrast, you have all of these figures that are shown face on with a lot of detail, kind of personalizing them, although they are anonymous. And they did this, the Singh twins did this to really emphasize the diaspora's emotional attachment and emotional closeness to what was happening to individual people. And this despite being physically absent. So we're going in for a closer look right here. And I wonder if at least two of you in the audience have recognized this figure. Now, this figure right here on the right. So what you're seeing on the left is a page from the illustrated Mughal manuscript from 1590, the Akbarnama, and it's a totally unrelated scene. I will say, though, that it is a similar scene of chaos, although not to the same extent. And it lives at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is a whole other conversation how it got there. But the Singh Twins probably saw it. At least they certainly saw a reproduction of it, because as you can see, a direct quotation of this figure here who's swimming in the Jamuna. He's fallen in. His buddy is leaning over the boat trying to rescue him. And note what he's wearing. He is naked from the waist up, and he's clad in kind of a white dhoti. And you have that same figure here, and there's a figure in red leaning over to help him. It's a direct quotation. So I told you these artists know their art history incredibly well. So we are now moving ahead in time, and we're moving to Canada. We're moving to, and this is the second and final painting that I'll be sharing with you today. In 2006, the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and which, by the way, is one of Canada's largest museums, and it has a robust collection of not just South Asian art, but particularly Punjabi and Sikh art. They commissioned the Singh Twins to paint a painting entitled Sikhs in Canada. They completed it in 2010. And I think that's important to note that it took them 4 years to paint this work, which also notes the dimensions. It's a small painting. And what were they doing within those 4 years? They were doing their research. They were consulting visual sources, they were consulting historical sources, and they were painting, because the detail, just like we saw in the previous image, is incredibly intricate. Now, in a press release, the museum reps noted that for the commission, the only criteria was that the work was to explore the history of Sikhs in Canada from the late 19th century, when they began to arrive, onwards. And the only other criteria that the painting had to have in it was, can you guess? A recognizable built landmark, the CN Tower. And that's because this is Canada, allegedly, Canada's most conspicuous landmark. Now, the ROM board, Royal Ontario Museum's board, also identified, and absolutely rightly so, identified the Singh Twins as the obvious choice for this commission, because by 2010, they had created a number of works that deal with identity in the diaspora, and they were really creating a name for themselves on the global stage. And the painting, as we're going to see, is truly a testament to the artist's meticulous research in true Singh Twins fashion. And so we'll go through it, and it's really a journey visually through time and space. We'll begin over here with some details, and the painting charts moving. So this little vignette over here is in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong in the late 19th century was a stopping over point that many made before that, the sea voyage. This is the sea voyage here. And of course, the earliest arrivals came to British Columbia, which is represented by this for us, or those of you in BC, that very familiar landscape. Now, before we move on to some of the details, I want to draw your attention to the butterfly at the apex of the composition. This is a monarch butterfly that represents migration, because these butterflies, of course, migrate vast distances. So we're starting at the top of the painting. And just to clarify, especially those of you who haven't taken classes with me before, these little cells in higher resolution are just their details that I've added so we get a better idea of what's going on here. So we are in the late 19th century. This is the first Sikh Gurudwara, and that is in Hong Kong. And it's significant not just for a religious standpoint, because on the passage, people would come there and pray, but also it was a community center where they would learn from people who had made the passage, you know, what to expect when they got to BC. And Sikhs were, as you know by now, very instrumental in establishing early industry in Canada. So for example, especially in BC, they were instrumental in helping establish the railway and the lumber industry. And so right here, we've got Sikhs working in the lumber industry. And this is a close-up of one of these figures. Now, the early arrivals, although they, in many cases, they were professionals back in India, in Canada, they were only permitted to engage in physical labor. But the Singh Twins reference that skill set from this figure. He's got his doctor bag and his stethoscope, but he's performing more physical labor. Down here, we have the first Gurudwara in Canada, and it's in Vancouver. And here we have the arrival and the installation of the first Guru Granth Sahib that is being installed in the Gurudwara in what looks like a Packard with much fanfare. Now, I really encourage you to look at the Singh Twins website, because they have a number of their works, and spend some time really drinking in these details. And I can tell you that the Singh Twins, by and large, what might initially look like just decorative features are often meaningful. So for example, here we see some paisleys. Now, paisleys, I know one of you in the audience knows very well that paisleys are really a textile decorative motif from Persia and North India. So it's referring to Punjab, but also superimposed over the paisley, where is my, there we go, superimposed over the paisley is a white maple leaf. And this really represents, the Singh Twins have discussed how it really represents this perfect fusion of the two communities. So, we are going down right here. So we're still in late 19th, moving on to the early 20th century. These are figures of early women arrivals, Sikhs coming from India. And initially, women folk were not allowed to come over with their men. But when they did, they brought different aspects of Sikh and Punjabi culture with them, which then took root in Canada. And among these are, of course, domestic textiles, such as pulkari embroidery. That figure in the middle is wearing a shawl. It's very colorful, it's hand embroidered, and women have been embroidering pulkari in Punjab for centuries. So this is a very important aspect of not just Sikh, but Punjabi culture. You'll also notice, and this is an example of a beautiful hand-embroidered pulkari textile. You'll also notice, though, that apart from having their heads covered, these women are otherwise dressed in contemporaneous Western clothing. And the twins discuss their choice for that it shows the concessions that the women, too, had to make. And also this uniting different aspects of their public selves. Oh, over here, this is a closer look at the tumultuous sea that represents not only the tumultuous passage, but also the tumultuous early years of integration. Oh, I also want to draw your attention to what looks like just a decorative carpet that the figures are standing on. It's meaningful, it's deeply symbolic. I want you to notice the strawberries, and here's a strawberry, what looks like cherries. There should be some cranberries in there too. This represents Punjabi agriculturists in Canada. And of course, strawberries, at least in BC, it's largely, at least initially, grown by Punjabi farmers. So we're moving down, we're in the right lower corner, and we see a number of historic figures that the twins took from history and from archival photos, such as, for example, the Vancouver Public Library. They did their research. And so we are in front of the first Sikh Gurudwara in Vancouver. And I think the most prominent figure here is Baltej Singh Dhillon. And in 1990, he became the first RCMP officer who was Sikh that was permitted to wear his turban. So very, very strong sign of integration and serving Canada. Here we have, there's a number of anonymous figures that were taken from archival photos, such as these two seated figures who are turbaned, yet they're otherwise dressed in probably early 20th century three-piece suits. They have traditional Punjabi instruments by them, and they would have been, like many others, playing traditional Punjabi, maybe folk songs, as well as kirtans, sacred Sikh songs, hymns. This is the first Canadian pilot who was Punjabi. And oh, look who we have here, the Singh Twins themselves. Now, they remain in, they live in England, but I haven't heard them discuss why they painted themselves, as we'll see, not just once, but twice in this work. But I would imagine that it's a way to really write or literally paint themselves into Sikh and Punjabi diasporic history. I want to also draw your attention to this figure here, the seated elderly gentleman. That is Baba Gurdat Singh. And his image was taken from this very photo. I'm sure you heard in class about the SS Komagata Maru, and he is the one who chartered this vessel. He was also an avowed Gutherite. And I'm sure you heard in class about how the Guther activism in the west coast of North America was very instrumental, very active in fighting for Indian independence, but from across the world. That too is referenced here by this placard, Independence for India, and celebrating freedom for India after the fact. So we are moving ahead through time and space to the left space cell of the painting. And here we have the Royal Ontario Museum itself. And the twins said that they included it not just because the institution was the ones who commissioned the painting, but also because of their holdings of South Asian, Punjabi, and Sikh art. A number of other examples of integration between Sikhs and Canada is, I don't know, I've never seen this commemorative stamp, maybe some of you have. It is commemorating the 300th anniversary, it's a Canadian stamp, 300th anniversary of the Khalsa. And oh, by the way, down here, this is the Komagata Maru. And I think it's significant. So this is my reading of it. I haven't heard the twins discuss this, But rather than rendering the ship from an archival photo or something, they have depicted it as a copy from a mosaic in a park in Vancouver. And I think this gives a positive spin on what was a really negative historical event. So what you have with this actual mosaic in Vancouver is a recognition of this event, and it's literally woven into Vancouver's urban fabric. So we have a number of other figures that surprised me initially. The twins did not discuss these here. There's this blonde guy, blonde man and woman here. And I did some research and holy smoke, that is the face of the former Prime Minister Harper. And I'm very happy to be proven wrong, but this looks an awful lot like his wife. I think her name is Lauren. And that would be significant because the Harpers did go to India and they visited Gurudwaras there, and they were given these ceremonial orange shawls. And they dressed more or less appropriately for that sacred site. Oh, look who we have again here, the twins themselves. So they're depicted twice in this painting. Now, I also want you to notice these other contemporaneous older figures that are playing traditional Punjabi instruments. And it looks like a religious procession. And this is probably a Nagar Kirtan in Canada. And a Nagar Kirtan is where religious hymns are sung, and it's a procession. And and actually, before I turn to these figures down here, one more thing I don't want to forget. Of course, we've got the Houses of Parliament in Ottawa. And that represents Sikh contributions to Canadian government at the highest levels. We also see some marigolds, and that probably represents, marigolds are instrumental sacred flowers used in religious rituals in a number of Indian religions. Down here, we see this inscription, the Spirit-Born People Exhibition. That was an actual exhibition that was held at the Houses of Parliament that celebrated Sikh and Punjabi contributions to both world wars. So it was a major public recognition of these contributions. And so returning to the topic of the Nagar Kirtan, we've got this row of figures here dressed in blue, and they're leading the procession. And the twins did describe how they purposefully had the group walking out of that kind of central space cell, encroaching onto the border. And it gives a sense that they are moving ahead in time. The story is by no means finished, and it's unfolding still. And I think this is a really appropriate place for me to end now. And if I may, I think this is a good place to end your course as well, because the story is ongoing, right? And it's very robust and alive. So thank you, folks. I'm very happy to have a discussion with you. This was a pleasure to share the Singh Twins art with you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful and rich talk. And as people, I'm sure, are gathering their thoughts and potential questions, I would like to just say one comment and then ask a question about the topic. At one level, the 1984 work, that's the cover of an important book.
Neilesh, I'm just trying to get people, the image, everyone's images back, because I can hear, but I can't see you, and I'd like to be able to see you. I don't know if I can do that. Maybe if I hit, because I slid so I could see all the images. I don't know if that's possible, but I can hear everyone, so that's okay.
Okay, so just as I was saying, so two things, the 1984, the work by the Singh Twins, that adorns the cover of an important book by Arvind Singh Palmander called Religion and the Spectre of the West, and it's often used to signify this difficult space in between what we mean by the Punjab and where the Punjab is, which is not just a territorial space, and Sikhs and Sikhism, which is also a topic that comes together really in the 19th century as a coherent topic of study after hundreds of years of Sikhs being in existence. You mentioned the Khalsa anniversary, and also there are images that suggest that there's a place for Sikhs as a coherent entity to be almost promoted as if this is a part of this history of Sikhs coming together in a coherent sense. It's also a site of critical religious studies, and that image is often used. So just a comment, something we've discussed in this class a little bit, and then a question. Again, I'm sure that there are people who have questions. I think I see one hand, but just if you could speak a little, just briefly, about the so-called miniature revivalist tradition, which I believe that the Singh Twins are a part of, and that there are others who might fit into that world. And if you could just say a bit about that and how they fit next to others who do this kind of work as well.
Yeah, so briefly, just to return to what you were saying initially, Neilesh, absolutely. And I think this painting really illustrates a darker side of community, and unfortunately we just see so much more of this happening in India as time goes on. And I think that a number of outsiders, a number of non-Indians, or those who don't know Sikhism, kind of don't understand that not all Punjabis are Sikhs, for example. And then this is also really beautifully illustrated in other examples of art and visual culture, such as textiles, such as the pulkari, as my and your student knows very well, that they are made and used for secular and religious events by Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, maybe even Christians. Yeah, but it's associated with the Punjab, the land, the area itself, and that identity. So to turn to the kind of what's referred to as the neo-miniature school, the Singh Twins were saying that this was kind of, as I mentioned, with their professors when they were in art college, that they were very not receptive to that, which shocks me so much, because how can you not just be entranced by these rich works of art? But the reception in Pakistan beginning, gosh, I think it was the late 90s, it was very different. And you had this major revival of appreciation for miniature painting, specifically Mughal, but also a reinvigoration of the school by retraining artists to paint as miniature painters, to the extent that they were in their classrooms, they were recreating the Mughal painting atelier, that they were seated on the floor. They were painting with single squirrel tail hair brushes to get the very minute detail. So it was a re-embrace and a revisiting of the tradition and making it new. And then in the 90s, interestingly, a number of these living contemporary miniature painters, I'd say the overwhelming majority are women, which was not the case in the Rajput courts or the Mughal courts, or even company school at all. So you have artists like Shazia Sikandar, Saira Wasim, who, like the Singh twins, are painting very politically informed art. They're weaving in elements of identity and pop culture, but they have incredible skill as painters, and they're referencing old historical tropes, etc. But the Singh twins, it's important to keep in mind, and this is really a testament to their amazing artistic skill, they were not taught how to paint in this miniature genre. They are self-taught in that regard.
Wow, thank you for that. So I will now turn to Dulma.
Oh, hi, Dulma.
Hi,
Nice to meet you out here.
and such a wonderful, fascinating presentation. And I
Thank you
learned
for
a lot
coming.
from you today. And my question is also regarding this Golden Temple. So it's a historical event, and especially how twins placed Indira Gandhi on the tank and her different faces or incarnations, and rejecting some historical characters. So what is the response from the audience, especially from the side of Indira Gandhi? And also it's a very brave visual representation. So whether we can find the same kind of contemporary visual representations from Sikh male artists. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so remember that the twins painted this painting 14 years after the event. So when does Indira Gandhi die? It's like less than a year after this event, right? So someone correct me if I'm wrong, but she was long dead. And I mentioned in passing that the way that the twins have spoken about how this media muzzling and the way, and not just the way it was, what went down, the horrible attack, but how it was very negatively biasly depicted in the national and international media, that really contributed to the events that immediately followed this. So ultimately leading to Indira Gandhi's assassination by her Sikh bodyguards, and then the counter retaliation with pogroms against Sikhs, which it was very badly handled. And I think that by the time, I don't know the reception when this was painted, but they're living and painting in London or in different parts of the UK. And as Neilesh was saying, it was used on the cover of a book that dealt with Sikh studies. And so I think it was, and for art historians, it's very much embraced. So, and I think that the twins also, rightly, they were describing this alienation that the international, the diasporic Sikh community had felt after 1984, after the event. And in terms of male Sikh painters, I know one, his name escapes me right now, but he's more of, I'm sure there are many that just I don't know, but one artist who's really accomplished, he's more of, I don't know if you can say a graphic artist, but he's taking from the Amar Chitra graphic novels, that kind of style more. So that's his pop art reference. And he also depicted a storming of the Golden Temple, as well as other Sikh martyrs. So, and I think that more and more we'll see as time goes on, more artists that identify as Sikh and portraying depictions from their own culture and that of being in the diaspora.
Well, we are
Thank
almost
you.
at the end.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end, but I just want to make sure if there are any questions here from the students. Yes?
Yeah. As long as I know, this form of art, miniature, it was originated in Persia, right? And yeah, and it was somehow influenced by Chinese art,
Yes.
and it's widespread in
Mm.
the Islamic world, especially in Middle East. For example, in Turkey, Turkish people also have their miniature, right? So my question would be, are Singh Twins paintings related to these kind of other kinds of miniature in other countries than India, for example, in Iran, in Turkey, or something like that. Another question would be, I might be totally wrong, but I think that the artworks of Singh Twins could be influenced by cartoon and Japanese manga. Am I right? Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Okay, so second question first. I never heard of any of them discuss manga references. However, I wouldn't be surprised. I bet they love manga. I mean, who doesn't love manga? And the fact that there's all of this action, perhaps, but I've never heard them say anything about that. Now, to your first question, which is such a good question, and please take an art history class with me, take an early modern South Asian painting class with me, because we cover so much of this. So yes, you're absolutely right. The root, well, okay, on one hand, you were talking about the Sino and then Islamic coming together during the Mongol dynasty, which then became the Ilkhanids, who were the first really Persian Islamic dynasty. But then on the other hand, as early as the 12th century, you do have miniature paintings in South Asia. And these are Buddhist in content, and the format is really different. They're long and rectangular because they're on palm leaf. They're really small. I don't know if you can see my hands here, but they're just a few inches in height. And so the format, it wasn't what we call codex form. It wasn't bound book. That's coming from the Islamic world. And so you get this integration. And also there were more of the horizontal formats, and even palm leaf manuscripts with early Jain paintings before you get sustained contact with the Persianate world. But by the time, and you know, we often think of the miniature painting in South Asia associated exclusively with the Mughals. But it's important to also remember that when the Mughals come on the scene in the early 16th century, that they are in their the last in line of major Indo-Islamic powers. So you had earlier what are called sultanates or Indo-Islamic kingdoms that similarly had illustrated books with miniature paintings. And those people, those rulers, those sultans had initially their roots in the Persian world. And then they came, conquered, especially North India, and then integrated aspects of earlier South Asian painting traditions, as well as bringing in Persian stylistic and thematic elements. So there's a lot going on there, a lot of different elements. And I'm sure the Singh Twins, I mean, these artists, as I really tried to emphasize, they are so smart. They know their art history, and I'm sure they're very aware of these different injections of cultural and artistic influence coming from the Mongol, the Persian world, etc. Yeah, but very well spotted.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, we are, for the public talk part of this, we are over time. So I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Melia Belli Bose. And I hope that we will have the chance to have an in-person discussion at some point with her about all of these wonderful topics. And at that, we shall close the public program. For all the students, please stay online because we have a bit more to do.
Oh,
But
good.
for everybody else, it was wonderful to have you. And I hope that we can see everybody in person in the future.